experience together. And we're in Memphis, and on a good day, things are a little cloudy. And in the last 4 or 5 years, it's been very depressing to try to figure out how to maintain the operating budgets of community-based organization and move forward the projects that are in many ways very similar to what you're doing. I think a day like today provides us a brief moment, and I'll give you my more extended notes, I'll provide them to the web, to sort of take a step back and realize what a remarkable first 50 years our industry has had. We're really coming up to our 50th anniversary of community development. If you can consider the Howe Avenue Development Corporation in Cleveland, Bed-Stuy Restoration Corporation, which if you believe Ron Schiffman, he invented several times in the early 1960s. We're coming up to 50 years, and what's this network achieved? It's extraordinary. Hundreds of thousands of quality affordable housing units, many of them built outside the traditional ghettoized neighborhoods where people were kept really at a distance from meaningful job opportunities, quality neighborhood retail services, etc. The affordable housing network has broken out of those areas to really begin to promote some level of social integration, which we absolutely desperately need. These networks have also been responsible for really advancing the notion of special needs housing, housing with services, and looking at the full bundle of resources that should come with a housing unit in order to help people actualize the benefits of what housing means. Also, a lot of the CDCs in this room, I know several of them over several decades of work in New Jersey, have also done extraordinary work in the public realm, the open spaces around the housing that you've created, and to reclaim streets, playgrounds, parks, open spaces where people can gather safely, begin to meet their neighbors, and begin to create a civic agenda about transformation. Also, the work of groups in this room, also expanding employment opportunities for the underemployed and the unemployed, and particularly difficult to employ individuals, ex-offender programs that many of you are involved in. Think about Newark, Memphis. We have a very high rate of returning folks from the criminal justice system. And in many ways, one of the primary resources for these young men and women have been the community development corporations and the small businesses that they've helped to create. We could go on and on. It's an extraordinarily impressive list of community development achievements that this network and others like it around the country have helped to create. But in addition to sort of the good community projects on the ground, these networks have also, in very fundamental ways, shifted policy. Now think about even things around law enforcement, where it was lock them up, throw away the key, and enforcement only, to really begin to promote the idea of community-based crime prevention, expanding alternatives for young people, and to move to a more community policing model. Also, in a lot of cities where we, over time, largely, I think in response to the failure of the urban renewal program, we became very reactive, where cities basically sat back and waited for the developer to come in and lay out what the agenda is going to be. Networks like the one here in New Jersey has challenged that reactive approach to really get cities to begin thinking about a vision for their future that really reflects the hopes and aspirations of their people, and move back into district-level, neighborhood-based planning that could help create a new municipal agenda that might help turn the city around and begin to talk about what an urban agenda for New Jersey is going to be. And I think that's had an impact on national policy. You look at the current housing policies of the Obama administration, and we might be frustrated in certain ways, but there are certain shifts that are really, I think, very positive that would not have come about if it were not for the strong advocacy and demonstration projects of groups like the network. The shift from Hope 6 to the Choice Neighborhoods program, where under Hope 6 we did, quote unquote, improve a lot of public housing, but very few of the former tenants ever got to return to the new improved housing, and many of them ended up distant from their historic neighborhoods in communities that were often underserved in terms of basic services, because we also did not decentralize the human service system that needed to support many of these families. I think that's a positive thing. I think the current administration's effort to try to create and actualize and move forward a place-based approach to planning and development, getting the storied, siloed federal agencies actually to cut across jurisdictions and talk about cooperative approaches, integrated approaches to planning and policy development, really are ideas that got seeded out of the success of some of the most successful community-based development organizations in New Jersey and elsewhere. And I think New Jersey should take great credit in sort of in many ways setting the pace. I mean, the work of groups like La Casa, Parkside, the New Jersey Community Development Corporation, and New Communities Corporation, and some of the newer generation. I was thrilled to hear about the work being done in Morristown, New Jersey, which is the first place we stopped on our way out of the South Bronx was in Morristown. And we lived right on the first block next to the Speedwell housing project on Logan Place. And I remember my father, the first thing he did is he went out in the backyard and cut a hole in the fence so that I could actually interact and play with the young kids who were just across the way, who were living in public housing. And to think about how far that arena has come in Morris County at a time when housing costs and land are so expensive is really impressive. Now, we've had a tough year or two, and there are some folks who are predicting the end of community development as we know it. We won't name any names, but come and see me after the session. I'll be happy to give you a long list. And you know, one of the questions you ask visiting sages or old organizers who are now college professors to answer, do you think the golden years of our profession and our calling are over? Is the best behind us in the rearview mirror? And I think the answer is absolutely and stunningly and unequivocally no. And here are just a couple of reasons why. One is I think the increasing cost of housing, home fuel, and petroleum to get to and from work and the tasks of everyday living are going to make exurban, low-density development increasingly untenable in a world that cares about global climate change. And so sustainability is going to be a pressure for people to rethink the opportunities in established historic city centers and established suburban communities. I think second, you're going to begin to see a movement within the Congress that will get bipartisan support that will actually reduce the level of support for infrastructure that absolutely makes possible otherwise low-density development projects that would not pencil out. If you don't have the federal government covering 80% of the sewage and road costs and infrastructure costs, you can't really go and take on a former farmer's field and develop it 1 house per acre. And if that goes away, again, the inner city and the established neighborhoods are going to become increasingly important. And then there's a topic I know many of you are going to be very disturbed to have brought up over lunch, but you know, to get a little gastrointestinal activity up before a heavy lunch is probably a good thing. And that is baby boomers. Who falls in that category? 1948, 1974. All right, don't be afraid.
We're proud. Yeah.
I'm with you. I'm 59. Well, what do we know about these folks? They've been incredibly active. They grew up in the 60s, many of them. They expect to be engaged in their communities. There's also something else we need to know about them, and that is they have not saved a nickel. Our generation, if you look at the distribution of savings, 22% of us have less than $50,000 in the bank of non-dedicated pension. 50,000, you know, many of us will spend that in sports betting our first year of retirement. 18% of us have between $51,000 and $100,000, not a lot of money. Well, anyway, you get up to $250,000, it only leaves 18% of us that put more than $250,000 away for retirement. Baby boomers are not going to be able to stay out in the burbs and the exurban hinterlands. They're going to have to come into smaller housing units that in walkable neighborhoods, in closer proximity to healthcare, and their preference will be near cultural and civic institutions. Then we also have something that even the slow-witted representatives of the Urban Land Institute, I'm a member, the bastard children of the Chamber of Commerce and the National Association of Real Estate Boards, ULI, that brought us urban renewal. They don't report that in their history very often. And the National Home Builders have actually done an analysis of what do families look like currently, what are they going to look like 10, 20, 30 years from now, and what kind of housing are they going to want. And the dominant form of suburban, large house, multi-bedroom, multi-bath, you know, with 8-car garages with house attached, right? Parsippany, New Jersey, is not what people profess in any of the surveys what they want. They're looking at a much more economical housing option, and they're also looking at the complication of 2 parents, if they're fortunate to be in an intact family, right, having not one full-time job, but several part-time jobs. And the difficulties of managing the tasks of everyday living when you're out in Pleasant Valley Sunday. So these are some reasons, along with the urban preference for rapidly growing percentage of new immigrants who are blessing our shores, which again is immigration. So all of this would suggest that the neighborhoods that you're working in the inner city and the established suburbs, and some of the farm support centers that the folks in South Jersey are involved in, could be well positioned to attract a considerable amount of new interest in terms of families, investors, and development.